So you bought the FX30 because you were influenced by someone on the internet, such as myself, or you realize how insanely powerful this camera is for capturing beautiful weddings. But now you need to know what settings are gonna help you achieve those cinematic results. So today's video, I'm gonna dive into my favorite settings for the Sony FX30 that helps me create beautiful, story-driven cinematic films every single time. So first, let's dive into the codecs and the image quality that I use to give me the best results. Inside the menu under image quality and file format, you will see a number of different options. In my opinion, especially for wedding filmmakers, which is most of you on this channel, there really are only two that you need to worry about. The codecs I use is XAVCHS 4K and S4K. So I use XAVCHS because this one is H.265 and it uses a high efficiency compression, which is gonna give you high quality with less data, giving you a lot more space in your SD cards and your hard drives. And since I like to simultaneously record on the wedding day, I need as much space as I can get so that I don't have to worry about swapping cards throughout the day. And speaking of SD cards, I use the SanDisk UHS Type 2 cards. They are a little bit more expensive than the Type 1s, but in my opinion, they are worth the additional price. But you can certainly get by an entire wedding day with the UHS ones. I still have a handful of the Type 1 cards that I use as redundancy SD cards, and they've worked fine. So if you need some SD cards for your next wedding coming up, you can find the links down in the description below. So diving back into my recording settings, I like to use 100M 422 10-bit, which gives me that beautiful 10-bit footage along with a ton of space to record with. Next is my log setting. So I have this turned on with my color gamut set at S Gamut 3 Cine. I have embed LUT file turned off so that when I import my footage later, what imports is in fact log and not one of my Rec 709 user LUTs baked into my image. This setting is useful, especially if you're looking for an efficient and quick turnaround time for your project, but for weddings, I like to have as much flexibility and control over my final image, so I always have this setting turned off. For lens compensation, I have this set to default. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I use simultaneous recording, and you can find this under media and record media settings. And this is a setting that I highly recommend you do in fact use, because when it comes to capturing someone's wedding day, you don't want to leave anything to chance. So I always record a backup file just in case something were to happen to one of my cards. For audio recording, I don't use an on-camera mic. I just use the camera's internals, which I have found to be perfect enough for capturing ambient and scratch audio. And if I need to adjust anything, I just slap some audio presets on there, some EQs, and I'm really good to go. But for the levels that I'm setting in the camera, I usually have this around 20 and then dial it back if I need to for the reception later on. For image stabilization under steady shot, I use active over standard, as I have found that active is a lot more stable than standard. Now, it does come with a small crop, but honestly, that's not really noticeable at all. Another beautiful feature that honestly made me want to switch to the Sony systems is one of its zoom features, and that's clear image zoom. For my zoom range, I always set this to clear image zoom, so if I ever need to punch in during the ceremony or any moment from the day to adjust my framing, this setting seriously comes in clutch. Next is shooting display, which is something that I always turn on in all of my cameras if they have this feature available, and that's the rule of thirds grid. This is an invaluable setting that you need to turn on so that it can help you adjust your framing and your compositions. This is where you can get super creative with your shot and create a well-composed frame. Next is another amazing feature, because Sony just has all the features that I love, is the emphasized record display. This gives you a large red border around your screen that eliminates the guesswork on whether or not you are recording. Now, I am kind of ashamed to admit that even though I have this setting turned on, I often find myself still under the impression that I'm recording when I'm in fact not recording, because I'm so locked in on the moment that I'm just like, I thought I was recording, but I really wasn't recording. You know, they're giving me all the tools I need to eliminate that room for error, but yet I still find myself making those bonehead errors. It is what it is. But nonetheless, such a useful feature that I highly recommend you turn on. For your exposure tools and metering, I have this set to spot. Now, spot metering is a camera exposure mode that measures a small area of the scene to determine your exposure, usually in the center of the frame that uses faces as a priority. This mode is useful when there's a large difference in brightness between the subject and the background, such as when your setting is very backlit or in those high contrast situations. For my zebras, I have this set to 70 so I can keep my image properly exposed and within normal limits. I do tend to expose more neutral, often for my highlights, even in log, so I find the zebras to be incredibly useful for that. For my autofocus, I have this set to continuous autofocus with face and eye priority turned on, face, eye, subject set to human, and everything else is default. I also have autofocus peaking turned on so that I can dial in my focus. Sometimes this setting can be a bit distracting, so I do have a toggle in my function menu to turn this on and off. And last is going to be my customizations. Now I will say with the Sony FX30, the button layouts, the ergonomics of this camera is so beautifully designed that there's not a ton of customizations that I needed to switch for this camera. Now for my a7S III, my a7 IV, there were a lot of customizations. But with the Sony FX30 and the FX3, everything is just so beautifully designed that honestly, you can take this camera right out of the box and start creating beautiful images, which is something that I absolutely love. But for my custom key and dial setup, I did change the third button to be my base ISO switch. This way I can easily switch between my base ISO ranges throughout the day, which is a setting that I wish existed on my a7S III, because I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally switched out of the base ISO ranges. Fat finger problems, you know? What are you gonna do? And then let's dive into my function menu. So my function menu is set up with white balance, focus peaking, gamma assist for log, my recording frame rates, my recording FPS so I can swap between 24 and 60, my recording format if I ever needed to switch this for whatever reason, picture profiles, audio, steady shots, and then my zebras. And generally the only time I'm using my function menu is to change my frames per second or to turn off my focus peaking. Since everything else has its own dedicated button, I don't really need to worry about much else. But the last customization that I absolutely love, and if you don't have this set up, you definitely need to, and that is the record with shutter button. Such an insanely useful and must-have feature, especially if you're using the a7S III with a cage, with a monitor, with a side grip. It's like you're just going through an obstacle course just to find the record button. So having that easily accessible with the shutter is just invaluable. But those are my settings for the Sony FX30 that I use to create beautiful cinematic wedding films. Drop a comment below and let me know what is your favorite feature with your Sony camera. Do you have the FX3, FX30, something else entirely? Drop your favorite setting below. I'd love to hear from you guys. And until next time, keep creating and telling beautiful stories. Peace.